I'm John Hall. This is Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. Shyla Sheppard of Bow and Arrow in Albuquerque is my guest this week, and we're going to get into brewing with local ingredients, starting a brewery, and post-COVID expansions. But first, check out beeredge.com for articles, to sign up for the newsletter, and episodes of the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. And you know that we already have a Facebook group for This Week in Rausch Beer, but now we have Twitter and Instagram, thanks to a push by Lou Bryson, and you can find smoky tweets and pictures at TW Rausch Beer on both of those sites. And of course, Beer Edge is on social media too. Please show it some love at The Beer Edge. Okay. It's cold here in the Northeast, and we've been buried in snow for the last few weeks, and of course it's bad all over, it seems, weather-wise. And so I've been thinking about warm climates, or at least warmer climates. And while I know it's not really tropical or an extreme dry heat there right now, my thoughts actually turn to Albuquerque, and especially Bow and Arrow Brewing. The brewery just celebrated its 5th anniversary under the same circumstances that we've all been under over the last year, but they had some fun with it. And rather than let the pandemic get them down, they're adapting quick and planning for the future. Shyla Sheppard is the co-founder of the brewery and my guest today. Before she got into beer, she worked in finance, helping entrepreneurs establish loans that would help fund their dreams. And in her words, she wanted to follow them and do what she loved, and beer was it. The brewery makes the most of the area that it's in and draws from family history, especially from her partner, Missy Begay, who is the brewery's creative director. The beers are put together by Ted O'Hanlon, who worked in breweries in Wyoming before going to the Southwest. Like you, I'm longing to travel again, and so that's where I started, by asking how things are in New Mexico right now. Here's our conversation. What's it like in New Mexico right now, beer-wise?
Beer-wise, there's still a lot of innovations and seasonal releases. We're still seeing a demand for, the newest thing. I was having a conversation with someone else in the industry recently, and she had been of the opinion or had read that, I think within this time of the pandemic, we were seeing a resurgence in kind of more of the staple year-round beers. But to be honest, we still see a big demand for the newest hazies, the newest pastry stouts, the newest, pastry sours. So we're still, there's a lot of new beers. We're still, the customers are still keeping us on our toes in terms of, coming out with things that are new and exciting. So, and I think that's really good for us and our team too. Just to continue to push the envelope and, have fun with what we do.
Has the pandemic complicated that, though?
I mean, for us, I would say that was something we were doing pre-pandemic, but I think even more so now. I mean, pre-pandemic, we had the benefit of having this beautiful tap room, that we had carefully curated an experience around our product. So then we were just sort of left with, well, our beer is great, and now we have to find a way to, communicate and provide cues through like social media about what this beer is about. So it's definitely challenged us to rethink how we talk about our beers, the types of beers we're developing, which I think is in large part been good for us. It's been a good challenge in terms of having to really think about what's the pipeline of beers coming up, and what are we going to do differently in this. We have a number of series that we innovate and have different variations of over time, and that's really in response to customers' demand for something new and different. So we have taken our own approach in addressing this, but we're, in terms of now, that we're canning, we're also having to develop and tweak labels. So just thinking through how we best approach those variations in a way that still makes financial sense. So it's always a balance between the two, but I feel like we're striking that balance.
You have one of the more visually striking tap rooms that I've seen, and you mentioned well curated, and there's a lot of thought that went into the visual aesthetics of your location. And it's not just the exposed Edison bulbs and here's our metal stools and our concrete countertop, like that kind of thing that you get at a lot of breweries these days. Like it was a real experience to
Yes.
be at your brewery. And so when COVID came and your tap room was shut down, where did you start to give people at least a similar experience when they couldn't actually be in the place you wanted them to be?
Yeah, that was tough. And I
There's
will
yeah.
say, we, like you said, we were very thoughtful about how we designed and even how we, set out tables and did placement of things, but also in some of the items that you'll see kind of tucked here and there. It's still sort of like an organic farmhouse, but there's influences in there that have meaning. And one of those influences when you first enter is this bust of a buffalo. And I would say when COVID hit, the pandemic was upon us, the mantra that my grandpa used to repeat to us was to be like the buffalo, in that when encountering the fiercest storms and blizzards, they turn and they face a storm. And that just rang through my mind at the time. And 2020 presented challenges that I'm proud to say our team stepped up to and took on pretty decisively. So we were constantly changing to and adapting with public health orders and just doing our best, to keep up and be mindful of safety. But when it came to translating some of that special experience to, a virtual place, that that was something that, it's taken time and it's continued to evolve. We looked for partnerships with other businesses. So one example, there's this local entrepreneur. She makes these beautiful charcuterie and grazing boards. So just from a visual standpoint too, like you look at her Instagram, it's eye-catching, it's gorgeous, it's very thoughtfully prepared.
Do you have
She
the
pays with
Instagram off the top of your head? Because I'm sure people
it's
are.
pick yeah, it's called Picnic NM. So what we've done is periodically we'll partner with her. So we'll promote her and push people to her site, and they prepay for their picnic boards. And so we usually do this on occasion on Fridays, and she'll then we'll tell her which one of our beers that we're really excited about. So she'll then on her social media kind of put together a board that pairs with that special beer. So we're kind of, we're supporting each other. It's very synergistic and it's very on brand with us. So we're creating this really fun Friday evening experience for people.
Yeah.
It's a small thing, but it can really brighten someone's day. It's something that people look forward to. So we like to do some of those things. We just celebrated our 5th year anniversary
Mm-hmm.
2 weekends ago. And we did like a virtual DJ. First of all, Ted and I talked about just kind of some reflections.
And Ted's your
You
brewer.
know, Ted O'Hanlon is our head brewer. Yep. And so he and I kind of talked about just reflecting a bit on the last year and some of the big changes that have transpired. And then we rolled into a virtual DJ. So that was fun, and we weren't sure like exactly how that would go, but it's like, you know what, this is our 5th year anniversary and we're just going to do what we can to celebrate this occasion. So that was really fun. I think people felt engaged, and it was on Instagram Live, so people could comment and and we were commenting back, so it felt engaging. So those are some of the things we just challenged ourselves with, how do we engage folks while, trying to maintain this sense of community and connection. And then along the way, Ted and I are getting more comfortable with doing like videos. So we've got our Instagram videos. We'll just update folks on what's going on. Ted will talk about beers. I'll talk about some special releases. So it was more of just like being very mindful of sharing updates and kind of contextualizing over video. And so we've gotten some really positive engagement with that. And that's been, a big part of it. And then also just since we pivoted during the pandemic and put our first offsite tap room on hold to buying a canning line, we've then been able to translate some of our ideas of branding and aesthetic and what Bow and Arrow is about to beer labels.
Yeah.
And those have been really well received. And I think just create this or just elevate, I think, the experience around our beer when people see it and they're excited about them. So that's been the other way that we've approached it.
I wanted to back up just a little bit though, because with the tap room being closed, obviously you could do beer sales to go. Um, and without a canning line, I mean, you were relying a lot on kegged beer. You were talking about giving people what they were asking for of what's new, what's exciting, hazy, pastry sours, etc. Um, without having the tap room where choice is preferred, I think for most people who walk through a door, and having to sort of limit or I guess more narrowly define what it was you were going to offer. What got left behind?
Oh, let's see. We definitely have narrowed our scope a bit, but having the canning line has been helpful. Pre-canning line, we did find ourselves in a situation where, we have a 15 barrel system. We had fermenters and brights that just had beer in them, and there were kegs already with beer in them, and just, we just didn't have the means to move it. So we definitely had to narrow our scope in terms of what we were offering. So some of the seasonals, some of them that we weren't sure if they would do so well. Like we had a blonde fairly recently and we were excited about it, but it just wasn't moving at a rate that could justify it.
Yeah.
So, we've kind of had to fall back on what's tried and true. So we have focused a lot on, on the hazies, on the pastry stouts, those things. So that's part of it. We have 16 taps, and I think we have at any one time these days at least 2 or 3 that are just open.
Okay.
So we are being more thoughtful about what we're producing. And in that line, like I was saying, it's still important that we are creating new things for our customers, but also for the sake of our team's, creativity. So one of the things Ted and I were just talking about this morning was we have a 1 barrel pilot system, but we didn't actually have a fermenter, like a temperature controlled one. So we're going to be purchasing one of those as well so that we can turn out, a couple kegs of something interesting and new,
Yeah.
and not be saddled with, an entire 13 to 15 barrel batch.
It's so interesting that you talk about creativity during the pandemic, because over the course of the last year or so, I mean, I guess it's about 11 months now that we've been in this, and the conversations that I've had with brewers, brewery owners have either been, yes, we're making the most of this and we're finally doing the things that we always wanted to do or just didn't have the time to do, or it's the opposite where people are just grinding it out and doing whatever they can to keep their nose above the financial waterline, and there's not the innovation. It's almost like a year of creativity, has been lost. Are there things that you're grateful for that you've been able to focus on that maybe you wouldn't have been able to?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the canning line, I mean,
Yeah.
that was something that we've always talked about it as being an eventuality. So this accelerated that decision, and it's been so good for us. So that, and then, I can't help but say I'm so thankful for my team. And I've done my best to keep things upbeat. because, it's been a marathon of a year.
Yeah.
So, my job is to make sure that my team has the resources to be successful. And I think part of that is also creating an environment where they feel, like they're contributing. It's not just nose to the grindstone. Yes, we've been working hard, but I think it's so important that we balance that with, some creative freedoms, something to look forward to. Um, so I think, I'm very appreciative of their willingness to roll with it and step up and, take these quick pivots with us, with me. And, when we pivoted away from the tap room and suddenly like we're moving forward with the canning line, people were on board and we understood the importance of it. So I just think that the belief they've had in me and these tough decisions that have been made and we've had to continue to make, we've been a very cohesive team and very supportive of one another. So I'm, by far most thankful for that, for their, belief in me and our path forward. So, that's the main thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. I had somebody describe it to me recently as doing battle, and these
Yeah,
are the people in the foxhole with you.
absolutely.
Want to switch gears a little bit. What were some of the early beers that got you interested in your eventual career track to joining this industry?
Yeah, well, I always talk about my first Hefeweizen, which was it's a funny thing to look back on. That was one, and I knew very little about the brewing process, so it was sort of mind blowing at the time for me to learn that some of these flavors and aromas were derived from yeast. So that
Banana,
kind of
clove.
sparked,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like whoa, wow, this is amazing. And so just that kind of sparked that. And then eventually, like in terms of like, I'm a huge Saison fan, but in terms of domestic producers, years back, I love Funkworks. They were, I would go out of my way to travel up to
To
their tap room when we were
Colorado.
in
Yeah.
Denver. Yeah, when we were in Denver. So that was a beer I've always like really loved. Um, and then early on, some of, the I'm blanking, um, Crooked Stave, and they
Sure.
were at the time, just focused purely on Brett beers, and I was a big fan of the wild and sour beers as well. And so just getting really inspired by what they were doing. And then eventually, a year after we opened, I got in touch with Ted, and both of us were very excited about pursuing wild and sour beers, and have like really taken off with that since he's been with us the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those were two that really influenced me, or three.
Are you guys making a Hefeweizen right now?
We are not, but we do. It's seasonal.
Okay. It's such a style that I think was so impactful, and I can continue to be so impactful for so many people, but it is so hard to come across, I think, these days.
Hmm. Hmm.
It,
there's one big, like everybody in Albuquerque, like the Hefeweizen everybody knows here is La Cumbres.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of the standard here in Albuquerque.
Okay. We don't get that where I live, so yeah.
I figured.
But would it be weird then? I mean, if I've often been curious about when there is a larger brewery that has a dominant style, what some of the not pitfalls, but some of the I guess the thoughts that go into, well, should we put something like that out on the market, or are we even going to be able to, even if the liquid is amazing, are we even going to be able to get on people's radar? Is that
Mhm.
something that has
That
crossed your mind?
Yeah, that can be. And we don't necessarily, I wouldn't say we necessarily brew things to style either.
Hmm.
But I know some people really care about, whether a brewery has won hardware for a beer. Um, So, there's been occasions where I'm like, oh, well, so and so, they just recently got a gold for this particular beer, and we'll just let them bask in that, and we're going to do something different. So there's, I don't know, sometimes that's part of the thought process, but I don't know, we always like to put our own spin on things. Um, so that's really
What
why,
what
where we try
what's
to differentiate ourselves.
what's a good example of a beer that you all do where you try to put your own stamp on something?
Yeah, so one of the more recent releases is our Curio series. And the Curio series is our foeder aged series. So we have a single, it's about 30 barrel foeder. And this was a project we started, oh man, it was probably almost a year to get that whole culture going. And we just released at the end of last year our first just straight Curio, no additives or adjuncts to it. So that one was one that we had an eye on doing something unique, and the variants of it have been ingredients that are indigenous to the Southwest. One that, so, things that are indigenous to this area that have a special sense of place or that we were directly involved with. So one of the variants was with Neo Mexicanus hops that we foraged ourselves out in the mountains of New Mexico. And it's the only hop indigenous to North America.
Yeah.
And so that was one example. We've also done a variant of our Curio beer with foraged Navajo tea. And then a third one, we sourced sumac berries from the Navajo Nation's tribal enterprise, which is called Navajo Agricultural Products Industries.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some things, at least in the wild and sour space, that we've done that people have, I mean, it sort of captured the imagination. I mean, we posted pictures on social media of the hops growing, wild, and backpacks full of them. And they were just kind of,
That's cool.
they just totally capture the imagination. And because everything I've read about wild New Mexicanus hops was that they were small and kind of, just not very conducive to brewing, but these were big and lush and just like far exceeded our expectations for it. So
Really?
that's a really, yeah, they're on our social media if
Okay.
you want to look at the pictures, but you can see for scale, like they're in our hands and they were just big, lush cones. Um,
Huh.
so that was one example. And then one of our year rounds is Denim Tux, which is our American pills with lightly roasted New Mexico blue corn. And that one has done really well for us. And it was interesting. We've had that beer for a while, but once we put it in a can and wrapped some imagery around it, people were like, "Oh, I love your new beer." And it was interesting because we have had it for a while, but once it was in a can, it's like it took on this whole new identity, and people just didn't really notice it in large part before. So that was kind of interesting as well.
Well, you're also able to get in front of new people now thanks to the canning line, I
Right.
imagine, right? So when people came through,
Absolutely.
I'm sure that they were drinking it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it always did well for us here in the tap room, but it was just interesting to have people, think that it was a brand new thing.
But you are brewing with ingredients, southwestern ingredients that don't show up in beer a lot. And I know from previous
Right.
conversations with you, you know, the specialness of some of this. I mean, even Neo Mexicanus,
Yeah.
I remember when that hop was, quote unquote rediscovered a few years ago, maybe, God, 15 years ago now. And there was a little bit of excitement around it. And then it immediately died off, and, because there just wasn't enough of it, or, it just wasn't
Hmm.
capturing the imagination of, of brewers today or consumers today.
Hmm.
But ha- I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this. When you're thinking about ingredients to use, indigenous,
Hmm.
to the Southwest, where do
Yeah.
you start, or where are you looking for inspiration?
Honestly, we start with just looking at what is in our backyards and what are these things that people take for granted. Um, and as I mentioned, I'm from North Dakota, but my partner, she's Navajo and she's from this area. So it's been interesting to get an introduction to things that were like everyday foods, like, or drinks even. So Navajo tea was one that they would have. She's telling me she had these great memories of her aunt making, having a big orange cooler with ice full of refreshing Navajo tea when they'd be out in the canyon. Um, so we're really curious about using that. And even sumac berries. Sumac berries have been used as a refreshing sort of like lemonade like drink. So we started with just looking like what is around us. And one of the other beers that we released a couple batches of that was received well was called Sunbloom, which is our saison. And the first iteration of it, we had used prickly pear puree, June berries, and Sonoran white wheat from Arizona. So
Cool.
that one also really did well and captured people's imaginations. Um, so that was really fun. And so we just continue to, again, just look at what's around us because, again, as we know, we can take things for granted, if it's around us all the time. And we just released our first hard sparkling water, um, which was an
Are you not
interesting.
calling it seltzer?
No, we're just calling it hard sparkling water.
Okay.
It's more rustic, so it's not crystal clear. It's got some color to it, but we also were challenging ourselves with, well, we've never done this before, um, but we think, we want to offer something that will appeal to maybe a customer who doesn't find something on the menu that appeals.
Hmm.
But we also wanted to stay sort of within our brand and what we're about. So we released the first version of it's called Desert Water, um, like a couple weeks ago, actually, in cans. And it also has prickly pear, juniper berries, and we added lemon peel to sort of really brighten it up.
Oh,
So
fun.
yeah, that's been well received, and we felt like kind of is on brand with what we're about.
Is there? There's obviously got to be a lot of education that goes into talking about some of the ingredients that you're using. Navajo tea is again, talking to you today from New Jersey. It's not necessarily something that is on my radar, or ever
Hmm.
has been. Um,
Hmm.
what are the educational conversations that you're having with people, before the tap room was closed? When you were actually able to be face to face with folks.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely show people images of it. So social media will, like for Navajo tea, I think we had posted, a fistful, like of basically a bouquet of Navajo tea. So visually people could see it. And then we would, educate our servers and have on our menus kind of descriptions of its flavor profile. Um, so that was really important, just showing, those visuals and showing kind of where it can be found out in nature. I think creating those connections is really important.
Mm-hmm.
But also just reiterating, like, that it's essentially a taste of the Southwest. So you may not be familiar with it, but if you're curious and you want something that's unique to this area, this is something you should absolutely try. So I think that's part of it. And then, yeah, just sharing, how is it used? How was it used? Generally to create some context, I think is important as opposed to just posting, hey, we're releasing this beer with Navajo tea,
Yeah.
you know, just contextualizing. And I think storytelling is a really important part of it.
Before you got into beer, you were working in investments, and you were helping folks. I think, as you put it to me once, pursue their own dream.
Mhm.
Um, and then eventually you decided, well, you wanted to do this for yourself. It's one thing to help other folks, but it's important to sort of follow your own path.
Mhm.
Can you be in the beer industry these days, or if we're thinking about the beer industry these days. And I guess the context for this is I've been thinking a lot about how after the Great Recession of 2008, there are a lot of people who were shaken up and hurt financially, or questioned their life choices, or decided to really sort of seize the day. And we saw a post recession boom with breweries, in 11, 12, 13. And I'm curious if we're going to see that again, and I'd like to think that we would. But having worked with a lot of entrepreneurs in the past, is there something that somebody needs inside of them, like in their soul, in their business pursuits, to really make a strong go of this?
Yes, you have to be tenacious. You have to have a mindset where if you can't get through something, you've got to figure out how to go around it, underneath it, through it. So I think having that sort of resilience and tenacity is absolutely critical. I mean, look at this time that we've been through in 2020. It's hard. There are so many difficult decisions that we all find ourselves having to make, whether it's personal and business. Um, it's it's been very challenging, but inevitably, as an entrepreneur and small business owner, you're always facing challenges. So I think it's really important to be, I guess, an analytical thinker, have problem solving skills, and be very solutions oriented. I think if you're one to get caught up in dwelling on problems, I mean, that's extremely detrimental. You just got to keep finding a way to move forward.
When you were working in investments and having conversations, with people who wanted to hang their own shingle, were there questions that you would ask to sort of gauge, what worked and what didn't? I guess questions, to sort of, see if somebody had the right mettle to make a proper go of it.
I think just listening to them talk about the opportunity, um, and their motivations was a good start, as well as objectives. But if it was, like a product, for example, just listening to them talk about like why it's important, why does it matter, um, what problem are they solving. I think that was the first place to start, and just getting a sense for their comfort with you know not knowing everything, not having the answers, but demonstrating that through other experiences that they could find a way, they could navigate it. Because um, running sort of any startup, regardless of the industry, you're going to just face so many different things that you've never seen before. So having the ability to reach out, find the resources, find the answers, um, and being, I guess, humble enough to do that and not pretend you have all the answers. I think that's an attitude that was absolutely essential and was sort of a recurring theme with successful entrepreneurs.
I don't know if I hear the word humble or the concept of humility enough in these conversations that I have with people. Huh. I like that. You obviously had a lot of experience before you started Bow and Arrow. 5 years in, what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
I had experience, but it was always, with other people. Like I didn't, sure, maybe we had a financial interest at stake, but it's just very different when your own house and you've got personal guarantees and, a second mortgage on your house. It's a very sort of different situation. But I mean, look, in hindsight, in the beginning, I think I allowed some things, and some of these conversations are being had right now, just not only in the industry, but more broadly in terms of structural racism, implicit bias, which is at play. I recognize that, but sometimes, as a woman, as a person of color, we tend to undervalue, what we bring to the table. And so, um, I guess in hindsight, I had the tenacity to move forward, and I was determined to make bow and arrow a reality. But I think I was like also just um, maybe unsure, like, can I really do this? And it's not helpful when you interact with other people who also question your role, your position, and whether you're like really capable. Um, so in hindsight, I'm like, I wish I had even a little more confidence, because you think you have to reach out to certain people or have other people involved to be viewed as legit. But I guess in hindsight, I realized, no, I was fully capable, and I have done this. And I think just having that confidence um, in myself that I have now, just as a result of experience and having weathered lots of things over the last 5 years. And what I hope is coming out of the pandemic in a position of strength. um, I think that has also, I've just proven a lot to myself through that, now looking back.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, over certainly the last year, and with last summer, as well, where a lot of the simmering race issues in the country really reached a new boiling point again, and the beer industry, was again reckoning with proper ways forward and meaningful ways forward. You mentioned some of these roadblocks that you had early on, or conversations, or barriers that you had. Have you seen any meaningful improvement over these last couple of months? And I know that's a very short period of time, and like real work is going to take a long time, but are there any glimmers of hope, or have things just continued on?
I would say, I mean, just having these conversations, because a lot of these things were always just beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And you see comments or things here and there, which could sometimes be disappointing, obviously. But now the fact that there's actually like very open and honest and raw conversations happening, I think that's definitely positive to create some awareness. And to actually have people listening to your perspective, because I think there's a lot of denial that um, racism or privilege even exists. There's still that. So the fact that these conversations are being had, and perspectives are being shared and listened to on platforms where people of underrepresented groups typically weren't really invited. I think that's really positive.
Still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
More conversations to be had, certainly.
Yeah, and I think one thing I will say is
Yeah.
these are important conversations, but it's a careful balance, because you know being someone who has experienced some different, like, not positive things, just being asked to, like, hey, can you be on this panel and talk about it, in the sort of emotional side of having to revisit all of that, is taxing. So I think also just being mindful, like, yes, it's important to have these conversations, but it should be thought about how to have these discussions and share this information in a way that doesn't just put someone on the spot, which is, I mean, just being mindful of that, I think, is really important.
As we think about moving forward, and you're saying coming out of this a little bit stronger, it's been a whipsaw couple of weeks for you, right? Your state was in that color coded system of what could be open and what couldn't, and you were red, and
Yes.
then you just flipped to yellow and I guess is hoping for an eventual green if we're doing a stoplight, I guess, a traffic light.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how your state is doing it. It could be, red, yellow, blue for all I know. Um, but you're in the yellow phase, and it happened a lot sooner than you thought.
Yes. I mentioned our tap room being closed in the inside since mid-March of last year. And while um, there was a point at some time later last year where this was before this color-coded metric system where we were allowed to open at 25%, but just given the numbers, I was not comfortable opening. So we remained closed um, until recently, where the state had adopted this new framework, which I was a lot more comfortable with. But I really, for Bernalillo, we're located in Albuquerque, which is in the county of Bernalillo. And so we're kind of the biggest metro area here in New Mexico. And I just wasn't confident that the numbers were going to improve so quickly. And then suddenly they did. So back on the 10th of February, our county moved from the yellow status, which meant for us in terms of our operations that we couldn't have inside sales or customers on premise inside. And we were limited to go sales and 25% of our patio capacity. So that's how we've been operating for a while. So suddenly on the 10th, we moved to yellow status, which meant that we could operate at 75% of outdoor and 25% inside.
Wow.
And just, yeah, so that was huge. And having been closed for a year, I mean, suddenly we were scrambling, and we had been working on a reopening plan in terms of our protocols, policies, sanitation practices. So all of that, but it was literally a matter of moving things out of the tap room because at our level of growth, there was just, pallets of bottles, from our wild and sour program that we're conditioning. There's kegs everywhere, and we're like, oh my gosh, this looks like a warehouse.
Yeah.
So
I've heard similar things from people saying like I hope they don't open us up too soon because we've moved a living room set into our tap room that is not for public use. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the situation we found ourselves in. But we were all, I think, as a team, ready to open, ready to, move forward. So last week on Monday, I think we had our team meeting, and then we just started moving things and clearing things out and making it look like a tap room again. So those were all at play, and we opened our tap room for the first time last Friday on the 19th.
What kind of reception
And
did you get?
it was, I mean, there were people ready to come in before we opened the doors. So that was great. People were mindful of our policies and the way we're doing things. We had people just telling us they appreciated the measures we were taking. So that felt really good. And the fact that it coincided with basically our 5th-year anniversary was really nice. So far, so good. We've had our first weekend of reopening, and things are running smoothly so far.
As we think about people getting shots in the arm and things reopening again and life sort of getting back to normal. The New York Times had an article over the weekend of, is there a boom on the way? And, a lot of economists seem to think that if the economy can recover pretty well, people are going to start to travel again. They're going to basically catch up on a missed year of life full of experiences. And I know it's been tough for a lot of small breweries in this last year of keeping the lights on and, maybe having to let people go or, really sort of changing up business plans a little bit. But are you feeling bullish about the future and sort of keen to ramp up growth for the brewery?
I am. I definitely see and hear, about the pent up demand. People are like, oh, I can't wait till I can have hobbies again and go out and experience things. So I think there is a lot of that that will sort of be unleashed once, things start opening up and people are feeling a higher level of safety. New Mexico is doing really well as a state in terms of vaccine administration. So that's also looking good for us. And, I don't just feel bullish, like those aren't just words. I'm actually now moving forward with our first offsite tap room. That's been on ice since, pre-pandemic, but I'm feeling, very optimistic about its success in a new market. It'll be up in the Four Corners, and we're investing in increasing our production capacity. So that's also something we're really excited about. And after seeing a few months of, basically brewing at capacity, I do have confidence that things are going to pick up and people are going to be ready to go out again and have these experiences that I think we do a really good job at delivering.
A year from now, which I'm not really in the business of predicting all of these things, but a year ago, I don't know if we would have been having this conversation in quite the same way. But if we're a year from now, what do you want to look around and see?
I want to see people out again, enjoying our spaces, not being fearful of each other, of the COVID virus, because it's interesting just thinking about now how we perceive different situations. When I see, like, I don't know, I think at home we were watching like some old concerts and just thousands of people in a stadium, and I definitely take pause and look at it differently than I did. But and it's kind of sad, that you sort of ambivalent about these things, but also at the same time, like I'm excited and ready to get to that point, and hopefully in a year from now we will be where we will be comfortable going to a movie,
Yeah.
or being close to like someone at the next table.
Yeah. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for any of us to sort of feel that way. It's just like the whole idea of personal contact right now with people outside of my pod, which is just my immediate family, seems weird in my brain.
Absolutely.
It didn't take long for that to become pretty well conditioned that hugging somebody is weird.
Totally. Yeah. So now I don't remember if your question is what was my hope or what was my expectation, but I was more talking about, I'm hopeful and looking forward to, reaching that point in the future.
Okay. And what do you want everybody to be drinking? Hefeweizen?
No. Our denim,
Boy, that was a decisive and dismissive no.
Well,
I could feel your eyes rolling while you said that. That was just, okay. Fine. I was just trying to do a callback. Yeah, I was trying to be nice there.
Let's call it back to denim tux.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's super crushable.
Fine. We'll put some coins in the coffer and we'll call it a day with denim tux. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your history and everything that's happening in your great state. I'm looking forward to being down there again and having pints, I hope.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you, John.
That's Shyla Sheppard of Bow & Hour Brewing, and my thanks to her, and I'm going to encourage you to stock up on those cans when you can. I've enjoyed what I've had in the past, and I'm looking forward to more. Where do you miss drinking? What's first on your list when you get the 2 shots in the arm? Tell me about it. you can email me, John Hall, it's JOHNHOLL at beeredge.com, or join in on Twitter at John_Hall. You should also check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to sign up for the newsletter. And if you want to help support journalism in the beer space, please drop Liz Melby a line. She's at liz@beeredge.com, and she'll get you set up with all of our advertising information, including our very affordable rates. Steal This Beer is a podcast that I host every Monday. You should check that out. The BYO Nano podcast is another, and it comes out on the 15th of every month. And This Week in Rausch Beer is also now a thing. It's on Facebook. You can just search the name, but it's also on Twitter and Instagram at TW Rausch Beer. It's a fun community that cares about smoked beers. Please come join us. You know the deal. Nate Schweber, he does our music. Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday. And that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.